Very good morning to you once again. And for those who didn't know about this part of Winnie Madikizela-Mandela's history, it was also quite significant before she met the late Madiba as well. Just fill us in on exactly what took her there and what happened afterwards.
Well, it's very interesting looking back at the early years of Nomzamo Winifred Madikizela, as she was known then. She moved from Bizana in the Eastern Cape to Johannesburg on the recommendations of her father Columbus, who suggested that she should study social work because of her social conscience, that evident from her early years. So she moved to Johannesburg when she was 18 years old, and by 1955 she'd finished her studies in social work at the Jan Hofmeyer School of Social Work, came top of her class, was an astoundingly good student, and was then offered a scholarship to the United States. At the time she was researching that, going to the library to look up details of where she would be staying, but she got this fateful letter offering her a position as a pediatric social worker at Baragwanath Hospital, and she would become the first black pediatric social worker at the hospital. But it was a real tough decision for her. She wrote to her father asking for his counsel on whether she should go to the United States on this opportunity or come to Baragwanath. And that itself led to her staying in Soweto and working here, and through her friendship with Adelaide, who would become Adelaide Tambo, she met members of the ANC and would go on to meet Nelson Mandela.
And one would have to ask at this point, Erin, what would have happened? How different would her life have been had she just made a different decision in those seconds or those minutes that it took her to decide to stay?
Very much so, and it's been very interesting for me reading into her early years, and in fact a love triangle between her, Nelson Mandela, and Kaiser Matanzima, who would become the leader of the Transkei. And in fact Winnie Mandela's father later became a agriculture minister or head of agriculture in the Transkei. He was a teacher, as was her mother. She was the fifth of 9 children, and as I mentioned, grew up with this very strong social conscience, something that played into her work as a social worker. People who worked with her in her early days at Baragwanath Hospital have described her commitment to her work, her visiting the mothers of women who'd had children at the hospital, doing social work and research in Alexandra, and really rallying at times for support for some of the people, the patients and clients she'd worked with here at the hospital. For example, reuniting a mother with her child through the help of a journalist friend who worked at a local newspaper. And also important, as we underline the significant life and achievements of this incredible politician with a long and varied history, to know that she made headlines even as a social worker here at Baragwanath, that she was known for her excellent achievements as a student and then as her early career as a black social worker here, long before any associations with her husband and her political career within the ANC.
And Erin, you have to certain qualities. You have to have certain qualities to do the work of a social worker. And it seems like those qualities remained with Winnie Madikizela-Mandela later. If you've seen the interview that Vuyo did with the student in that hostage situation, the man who Winnie had actually talked down from holding that employee hostage as well. We also saw her trying to woo Julius Malema back to the ANC at some point. She's always sort of been that go-between, that conduit, if you were to call her, that middle person. And it's very also boggling then that she also came to be known as somebody, like we heard Nicolau say earlier, who could be divisive at times and somebody who ruffled a few feathers at the same time.
Of course, and if you look at that book, 491 Days, which is based on her journals of being in solitary confinement, the sort of abuse, trauma and battery she was subjected to by security police and a very senior police torturer under the apartheid regime, it contextualizes the radicalization and the strong military stance that Winnie Madikizela-Mandela took in her later years. And it's important to put that into context and understand the sort of treatment she endured, her separation from her children, one of whom she actually gave birth to here at Baragwanath Hospital, and her separation from her husband. So that's all part of the story of her life and part of the context here. And of course, we know she has long had an affinity with children. The fact that she worked as a pediatric nurse here at Baragwanath in her early 20s before she was engaged and married to Nelson Mandela speaks to that. But of course, also her affiliation with young people came to haunt her, you could say, in terms of her dealings with the Nelson Mandela Football Club and some of the controversies in Soweto in the late 1980s. But if you draw the long line, the long arc of her life and look at her social consciousness, the kind of work she began here in the 1950s and would go on to do even when she was in internal exile in the Free State, you get a sense that this was someone who had a strong sentiment for people and their suffering. And that's certainly something I've seen looking into her life as a social worker in the early days.
All right, thanks very much. eNCA's Erin Bates at Chris Hani Baragwanath Hospital for us this morning. Winnie Madikizela-Mandela worked as the first black pediatric social worker there. We'll chat with her throughout the morning as we try and get more views also from those in and around there as to what late Mama Winnie means to them. We'll have more for you when we come back.